personalization without purpose is pointless. But that purpose really has to be predicated on what the customer is trying to do at that particular point with the brand. Yeah, what's their need, their wants, their objectives at that point. I remember working for a brand and they were really proud. They had 180 journeys in their platform, right? And I was saying, oh, great, okay, but do you know the value that you're getting from each of those journeys, right? And also, more importantly, do you know how journey 47 possibly detracts from journey 31? I hate the term hyper-personalization. Right? My wife's a doctor, right? So hyper anything is not good.
One of the challenges I see in retail is CRM is anchored somewhere within the digital organization, which is I have data from the moment you land on my website through checkout. I know what you've been clicking on, so I can run a great campaign. And then someone tells them, you've got to do this also for the physical stores. It's surprising how many retailers won't send you store-specific communication. Welcome to the Retail Spotlight. Today, we're diving deep into personalization and CRM with Gianfranco Cuzziol, who brings decades of experience from brands like AESOP, The Body Shop, and Avon. From the fascinating journey starting as a secondhand car salesman to a global CRM leader, we'll explore how understanding customer behavior shapes successful retail strategies across the world. Let's get started. Lovely to have you here today, Gianfranco. Thanks for joining us on the Retail Spotlight.
Thank you for having me.
We met on, as people tend to do nowadays, on the social networks, and I've been following you for some time and taking in all of the insights you've had to share about the CRM space. But let's start maybe by having you share a bit about yourself with the audience so that they get as excited about this conversation as I already am. So let me hand over to you to give us a quick introduction, and we'll dive right in after that.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. I'm a firm believer that who you are now is based on your past, right? And you are either scarred or enlightened by your experiences. So I just fell into this stuff, right? So my first degree is in astrophysics. I often saying that I was actually the worst astrophysicist ever to come out of the University of Birmingham, which is why my first job after university was as a second-hand car salesman. Awesome. But actually, as a second-hand car salesman, you learn a lot about customer behavior and context and mindset as well, right? So I learned a lot from that cutthroat industry. I remember at the time, people would often bring in a car to trade in. And I would do the data point collection piece, right? So I would look at the logbook, see their mileage, number of owners, ask them if they did city or motorway driving, how regularly it was serviced. But the one thing that really showed me whether they were intent on making a deal that weekend was I got them to open the boot of their car, and if their car boot was devoid of clutter, had been vacuumed, I knew that they were there to sell their car to trade it in for a new one or an improved second-hand one. If it was as cluttered as mine is now, I knew that they were just exploratory, right? So that's behavioral targeting, many years ago on a garage forecourt. And then I kind of fell into data and marketing. My first role was actually working for a supplier to a big retailer in the UK, Marks and Spencer's. I was there for 4 or 5 years, and then fell into a customer service operation. And we used to look after the billing for a whole bunch of store credit cards, and we were talking about telco, so telco statements at the time. Was there for a few years. Went to work for the Royal Mail in the UK, and at the time I spent a lot of my time as a direct marketing consultant, convincing FMCG companies in particular to transfer some of their above the line, their TV and press spend into this new fandangled thing of data-driven marketing, right? And then really went into the agency world. So I've probably spent about 20 years agency side, always in the CRM, data, personalization, loyalty, retail space. Worked for some big agencies, small agencies. And, you know, the beauty of working agency side is you get to work with a whole bunch of different brands, right? So I've been fortunate enough to work with the likes of, I don't know, Center Parcs, BMW, Disney, EasyJet, Compare the Market, True Religion Jeans, you know, the whole gambit of sectors. And that was really useful. I got to learn how to tell a story, which is useful when you're trying to win pitches. I remember turning up at one pitch with a snakes and ladders board, and that worked really well, right? And talking about the game Whack-A-Mole at another pitch with BMW. And I was fortunate enough to help set up some CRM and data analytics capability within a couple of agencies. Now, I guess now about 6 or 7 years ago, I got the opportunity to go brand side. And I was invited to be the global head of CRM for AESOP, which is a beautiful skincare, body care company. Global head of CRM there, set up their CRM tech infrastructure, their organizational structure, and set about how do we do CRM in this retail environment. AESOP at the time were part of the Natura and Co group. I went to be global head of CRM and personalization for the group. And the group at the time was AESOP, The Body Shop, Avon International, and Natura in Latin America. 4 very iconic brands, 2 very different business models. So AESOP and Body Shop was primarily D2C through their retail environments and online. With Avon and with Natura and Co, slightly more convoluted model, which was a B2B2C. So those 2 brands combined have 8 million reps and consultants around the world. I'm not being stereotypical, but predominantly women. I think about 99% of the reps and consultants were women. And we effectively use them as the channel to get the product out to the marketplace. So slightly convoluted and a different way of thinking about, well, who are we talking to? Are we talking to the end customer? Not really, because actually we didn't know very much about the end customer. So actually, how do we talk to these 8 million reps and consultants to help them do what they want to do, which is to sell the product? And so I was at the group there for about 5 years. And so for the last couple of years, I've gone back into consulting, mentoring. I published a book last year as well. So I'm kind of enjoying this time doing a bit of everything, if you like. And that's where I am today.
That was great. Especially because I'm a particularly big fan of non-linear stories. I do believe, being a data person myself, that data follows you. And I think, astrophysics is all about the numbers. And through those different meandering paths, you ended up in CRM, which again is a data-heavy space.
Yeah, and actually, now that you think, now that you mention it, I guess numbers have played a part in every single role that I've played. Even when I was working for the supplier to Marks and Spencer's, I used to look after the account teams who made stock availabilities through to Marks and Spencer. So we would typically we'd have footwear coming in from India or from Brazil or from Italy, and we would need to try and predict, what quantities, what sizing we're going to be on that shipment, because we'd promised the retailer a certain amount of stock for Christmas or for a particular period. And so those weekly stock declarations as to what were available, which admittedly sometimes we made up, right? Or because we were never quite certain what was on the ship, because the supplier would say one thing, but what turned up was often a slightly different thing. So numbers were really important in those days as well. So yeah, numbers and data have always played a part in what I've done.
And that brings me to one of the topics that you touched upon that I'm keen on discussing with you today. When you're within the industry and you think of CRM and personalization and targeting and all of that, it's a very numbers driven thing. You're looking at what your volume is, what your reach is, what your conversion is. But I think somewhere in the mix of all of that, the basic idea of what is meant by personalization gets lost, right? So if I look inside your head today, Gianfranco, and I say, let me go find where personalization is defined or illustrated, am I going to see a list of rules that says you need to name the person, you need to message them on their date of birth, you need to refer to them with the right gender, and so on and so forth? Or am I going to see something else? What is personalization for you?
Okay, so let's start with a little mantra that I started to rant on about a couple of years ago, which is, before defining what personalization is, I think you have to think about the fact that personalization without purpose is pointless, right? So
PPP. I like that.
PPP, right? So
Good
and
alliteration.
that purpose is a double-edged sword, right? Because obviously, as a brand, you know, we want to sell stuff, right? It's because it's happy keeping the customer happy. It's great. Happy keeps the CMO happy, but doesn't keep the CFO happy, as you can imagine. But that purpose really has to be predicated on what the customer is trying to do at that particular point with the brand. Yeah, what's their needs, their wants, their objectives at that point, and that might be, I'm doing a bit of exploration in the car space, right? Boom. I need a bit of inspiration about how to use my new camera, or I want to buy, or I'm thinking about buying a complementary product to the 2 skincare products that I bought from you 6 months ago, right? So I think when you start thinking about the purpose that the customer has at that point in the customer journey, then you can start thinking, okay, so right now, how does personalization help the customer at that point? And at what level of personalization is required to deliver on that need? I hate the term hyper personalization, right? My wife's a doctor, right? So hyper anything is not good in her world, right? Hyperglycemic or hyperventilating, it's not good, right? I think it's about finding the right level of personalization, yeah, not going overboard, and so becoming creepy to a certain extent, right? Invading privacy. So I think you can under and over personalize. If you have data that you're not using in the right way, you're missing a trick. But also, I think you can over personalize. I remember working with a sports broadcaster in the UK, and the marketing managers wanted to not only personalize the communication to the fact that you were a subscriber to the TV channels, they wanted to reflect the fact that you were a sports channel subscriber. They wanted to reflect the fact that you were a football fan. They also wanted to reflect the fact that it looked like you were a Manchester United or a Leeds United or a Chelsea fan. I was kind of uncertain about doing that, but we personalized to club level, and engagement with the audience just bombed, just fell off a cliff. Right? So we put ourselves in the customer's shoes, and we thought, well, hold on a second, why has the customer come to you as a brand? And it turns out that the customers had come to the brand because of the breadth of content, the breadth of sports content that was available. And here we were, because we had the data, because we had the technology, because we thought we were smart, thinking, no, let's personalize to the nth degree. Whereas in fact, if the customer had wanted Manchester United content or Chelsea content, they would have gone to Manchester United TV, Chelsea TV, Liverpool TV. Not only that, but we then also looked at the customer satisfaction or NPS questions that the brand was asking. And the question that was asked by the brand was, are you happy with the breadth of content that we're providing you? And here we were sending customers down a particular rabbit hole that they didn't want to go. So again, you can definitely over personalize. So I think that it's about finding the right balance in personalization so that there's a bit of serendipity as well, right?
That almost sounds like a user experience question as well, though, right? But I want to take one step back. You mentioned the example that really stuck with me is the boot of the car, right? And to me, if I abstract that, that's basically a scenario where you're saying you have the data points, right? You have the miles driven, you have the logbook, you have the model, all of that. But there's signals out there that aren't in the data that you need to be looking out for, apparently, and which makes a lot of sense, right? So the best salespeople aren't the astrophysicists looking at the number or the data scientists like myself looking at the number. The best salespeople are the ones who are reading people well. And if I then go into what the job of personalizing something is, of doing those CRM campaigns is you're trying to sell to the customer. If we now translate this into the retail world, where do you see the opportunities to find that mix or that balance between what the data is showing, that I'm a Manchester United fan, let's say, and what a human being would otherwise see that we don't have a good proxy for in the data yet?
You know, I spent 20 years as a CRM planning strategist, right? Working across brand and CRM and data teams. I often talk about this idea of thick and thin data, right? So the thin data for me is the digital footprint that you're giving me, right? So I'm doing this on your website, I'm clicking on this email, I'm responding to this WhatsApp message. But the thick data is understanding customer mindset, right? Why are they doing this, right? You know, are sales going up in this period because we've dropped prices, or is there something else going on?
Why thick and thin as
well, because I think thick, when you start to understand customer and mindset, right, and the context, I think that gives you a much deeper understanding of why customers are doing things, whereas a thin data just tells you what they're doing, right?
I like that.
And if I give you an example of this, and they were really good at picking up that thin data, right? So if you bought a sample pot of paint, yeah, it went through the POS system, went into the CRM machine in the background, alarms and whistles would go off and would say, aha, this person is thinking of doing some DIY, some painting and decorating. Let's send them some offers around paint and paint brushes and cleaning equipment. But what the retailer was really interested in was, how can we spot someone who's just about to embark on a £10,000 DIY project before they've committed to a particular retailer, right? So before they go to B&Q or Homebase or Travis Perkins, how can we spot that individual? Because that's really where the money is for the retailer. So the first thing we did was look at the data, right? And we looked to see whether there were any transactions that a customer might make that might be a pre-signal, right, to say, aha, this person's going off one of these things. And I often use this at conferences and ask people what they think. And people say, well, a measuring tape or a sample pot of paint. And my stock answer is, no, that's not right. The one item that was a big signifier of a DIY project coming forward was they would buy a packet of birdseed. Yeah, all right. So well, hold on, that just doesn't make sense, right? So then we spent time with customers, right? And again, got to think about what the customer was, why they were doing this. If you put yourself in the customer's shoes, before they embark on that kind of project, they do their research, right? So they go to their 4 closest DIY suppliers, and they spend a bit of time in there getting inspiration, looking at prices to see what kind of services are available. But what they often did in there is they would buy a product that was not related to the project. And actually, you probably wouldn't go into that type of store to buy that product. Yeah.
Interesting.
Now, birdseed was an outlier, as was, I remember a few years ago, we walked into a DIY store in the UK. They used to sell confectionery at the till or DVDs, right?
Bottle of Coke, something like that.
And you wouldn't normally buy that kind of thing. And we found that was, so again, that got us thinking about this thick data, understanding the customer, which is why, I think that before you go down the personalization project, the route, before you start thinking about, how do you set up CRM, right? So you need data, you need technology, you need people, you need processes, right? But before any of that, you have to think about the customer. You have to think about and in very simple terms, customer journey planning, right? Let's build that out. What is the customer trying to, we talked about it earlier, what is the customer trying to do at that point in the customer journey? And I remember doing this at AESOP, we had a very simple 6-stage journey. I've seen journeys being split up into 13, 15, 20 stages. It just gets overly complicated. But 6 stages. What's the customer trying to do there? What's their mindset? What's our role as a brand in there? What are the touch points that they're using at that point?
Mm-hmm.
What are the opportunities for data and personalization to enhance that experience, right? And what that also does is it helps you understand the gaps that you have, right? Because you're thinking, oh,
Right.
well, I want to do this in my store, or I want to do this on my website, but I haven't got that data. Okay, so how do I start collecting that data? And if I never start collecting it now, then I'll never be able to do this. There's a bit of technology that's missing there. That's not allowing me to capture that data or to utilize that data in the right way. Okay, let's think about how we can fill that gap. So I think that for me, just boils down to that understanding customer, building out the journey, then thinking about the data that you need to fulfill the customer promise, if you like. Then you can start thinking about how you want to bring in technology to support all of that. But to be honest, I think that technology is the last piece in the puzzle. And also, the other thing I think that often gets ignored is, how do I want to set up my teams, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the best way? Am I just a single country brand? Am I a multi-market? Am I a multi-region with markets within regions? So again, how do I want to set up my organization to satisfy what are probably very different customer needs and behaviors in those different markets? Then how do I bring in technology that allows me to satisfy the way that I want to run my business that satisfies my customer needs? And I've worked with brands that have done this, that buy the technology first, right? So
Right. And they think of themselves as one brand, but actually they're on the surface of it one brand, but perceived very differently in different places.
I remember when I was at AESOP, right? So we set up the global CRM capability at AESOP. And one of the first things that we did in terms of helping us understand customer was, I did the very, might call it boring, but very useful idea of building out customer segments, right? Understanding recency, frequency, value across the globe, right? But very quickly, I realized that having a global segmentation and a global recency, frequency, value model doesn't really help you understand the nuances of how the Asia market behaves in comparison to the Americas, in comparison to, say, Australia, New Zealand, because at the time, Australia, New Zealand was a very mature market. AESOP was an Australian brand. Europe was mature. Asia and the Americas completely different, and their spending behavior was different. So a hero customer in one segment was in one market was different to a hero customer in a different market. So I think that getting that nuanced allows you to go on that journey a bit more with a bit more confidence, I think.
We had a really good conversation about this some episodes ago with Roger. He's the chief digital officer of Bata around this topic. Bata is one of those brands which is in virtually every country. And because they're so old, they're often perceived as a local brand in many geographies, even though they're actually not. And there were some really interesting insights in there about how they went about setting up the tooling, but also, as you said, the team and the strategy around serving all of those markets in their own ways, but still offering a centralized platform to do that. So that's a really exciting piece of the puzzle. One of the things you mentioned a couple of minutes ago that stuck with me, right, where you said you don't want to do like 20, 30, 50 different journeys and layers and all of that, but you want to have like your 6 or 7, whatever that number needs to be for your business. And that also makes me wonder, when we talk about over personalization, hyper personalization, is that necessary? Are humans really that different in their buying behavior as we'd like to think? What have you been seeing behind the scenes, right? Are we all just kind of 7, 8, 9, 10 segments of monkeys doing the same things over and over again? Or are we truly all those unique snowflakes that we think we are?
We often talk about a segment of one, right? And 5 years ago, servicing a segment of one would have just been ridiculous, right? Because I think creating the journeys for that, creating the content for that, creating the copy for that, it would just be too difficult, right? I think that now, and again, we'll again lightly touch on AI. AI allows you to get closer to that organization. I think AI obviously allows you to kind of do that at scale these days, at scale and at speed. But I think that sometimes, you 6 or 7 segment. It's not even the 7. So 6 or 7 parts of the user journey, right? Because I think the other thing that I think you have to remember is that you have to, particularly if you're working with a global brand, you have to sell this idea to people around the world, right? You have to sell it to the C-suite. You have to sell it to the retail team. You have to sell it to the merchandisers, to the marketing team. So you can't make it overcomplicated, right? Because I think that the more complicated you make it, the more difficult it becomes to communicate, to be understood, right? So I think, I've got a degree in astrophysics, right? But this stuff doesn't need to be rocket science as far as I'm concerned, right? But also the journey piece. I remember working for a brand, and they were really proud of the fact that they had 180 journeys in their platform, right? And they were, it's like, wow, we've got 180 journeys. And I was saying, oh, great, okay, but do you know the value that you're getting from each of those journeys, right? And also, more importantly, do you know how journey 47 possibly detracts from journey 31, right? So where, are you just paying robbing Peter to pay Paul kind of thing, right? When I was at AESOP, when we started the CRM stuff, we did it very simply. We looked at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the journey, right? Because we knew we had certain issues there. How could we look at the welcome journey? How could we look at the cross-sell bit?
How many variants did you have there?
Well, so it kind of depends. I mean, if I look at the welcome journey to start with, I think one of the key things with personalization is that when we started to look at the data and we looked at the segments and the cohorts and the journey that customers took from being a new customer to a hero customer, I very quickly realized that sometimes you can oversell, right? Or sell at the wrong time, right? So if I'd bought a €15 lip balm this week, if next week the campaign to be run was to sell a €150 fragrance, you'd get that message. And I went, I just think that's too much of a leap for customers, right?
Not committed enough yet for that spend,
right? If I've just bought a particular skin moisturizer or hydrator, as we called it at AESOP, why am I trying to sell you something that is complementary to that next week when it's going to take you 30 days to understand whether this particular product that you've bought, is working for me? So again, it's about not so much putting stuff into the welcome journey as we took stuff out,
away
right?
from it.
But again, you could say that we had 225 variants of the welcome journey, because one of the things we wanted to do was when we talked about CRM, implementing CRM for the brand, the retail teams were concerned because they were going, well, hold on a second. I don't know if you've ever been into an AESOP store, but when you go in there, the consultant will often spend 40 minutes with you doing a skin consultation, making sure that they get the right products. And so they're effectively converting you from prospect to customer. And they were saying, well, I'm spending 40 to 50 minutes with a customer only for you in CRM to take their data and send them to .com. Is that what you're going to do? And I go, no, that's not what we're going to do. So one of the things that we did with the welcome journey was that the welcome no longer came from the brand. Obviously, it came from the brand, but it came from the store that you made your first purchase in.
Mm-hmm.
Because we wanted to cement the relationship between store and customer. Yeah, customer loved it because they had that. They were reminded of where the store was. The consultants, the retail teams loved it because they saw that we were trying to promote their store as well. But also any feedback that the customer wanted to give back to the brand didn't go to some anonymous survey monkey or type form on the website. We encouraged them to go back to the store and speak to the consultants. Yeah. So you could say that had 225 at the time variants. But it was a relatively simple journey. And it was only after 30 days that we started to kind of then Well, the cleanser and the toner that you've bought, we think you should be supplemented with this hydrator. And we also noticed that customers wanted to be comfortable with a particular category before moving into a different category. So if you'd bought a body wash from us, the next thing we should be selling you isn't a skincare product, because it's quite a leap. You know, if I take my wife as a market research sample of one, she will wash with whatever's in the house, whether it came from Avon, Natura, AESOP, whatever it might be. But what she puts on her face is, well, hold on a second, I'm not just going
That's holy. You can't touch that.
Yeah, okay, yeah, exactly. Right. So we saw that customers tended to become comfortable with one category before moving into another category. I think that happens with a lot of other products as well, you know, household products. I'm a big fan of starting things relatively simple, yeah, before moving into any degree of hyper personalization, which we've already discussed is a horrible term.
What I also think in the space you're referring to, especially, right, or generally products that aren't commodity, let's say, often gets missed, and I've seen some good examples of it lately, and I hope that trend really picks up, is giving me helpful information about the products I've purchased. Right. So, you know, there's one thing to tell me, okay, you bought this face wash or moisturizer, and you know, here's something that goes hand in hand with it. You might like it. As a consumer, it's pretty transparent to me that you're just trying to sell me on more. But if your entire goal with that welcome journey is to build that relationship and engagement, which is ideally what a welcome journey should be about, then you're probably best off telling me, here's how you get the most out of the thing you've already purchased.
Which is what we did with AESOP. We added relevant how to use your product links, because, you know, I'm a typical man, and I may spend 40 minutes in the store and you can tell me that the product should be applied in this order and with this amount of quantity and this amount of water. But as soon as I left the store, I've forgotten this, right? So to make sure that you because AESOP stuff is expensive, right? An AESOP body wash is £40, right? So we want to make sure that you're using it in the right way. That education information piece, I think, is important, which is why I think that understanding at what point in the customer journey what education a customer needs is right as well, right? So how do you use in-store technology to do that? How do you use in-store people to do that? How do you use post-purchase communications to help you understand that? And even things like, you know, the gap between point of purchase and the product arriving, why not fill that gap with useful information as well, right? I remember there's a clothing brand in the Nordics, and I bought a couple of T-shirts from them, and it's going to take 3-4 days for the product to arrive. I'm okay with that. But in between, you know, not only did they give me notifications around when the product was arriving, you know, it's been packed, it's been shipped, you know, it's got to the UK, but also they gave me advice about how to keep the product in its best condition, because they were expensive T-shirts, right? Here's one way of how some of our customers, how they fold and store their T-shirts, or how some customers use a hanger to. So again, it's just keeping me engaged with the brand as well, right? Because talking to this point of, well, that seems like a really good idea. Can we put it into this industry as well, right? So I remember working with a house developer in the UK, and they thought it would be a really good idea if you were buying a new build, if you bought it off plan, so the house or the flat wasn't quite built, they would send you updates as to the progress of the build. And they wanted to go to the level of detail of the walls have just been skimmed with plaster. You kind of go, yeah, you know what? That's probably too much detail. I don't really care.
I don't need to know this.
You know, yeah. I mean, give me some updates. I get that, but not to that nth degree. I often, the Spotify Unwrapped thing, right? great idea, right? And I think it really works for Spotify. And
And everyone wants to do it now. And
right,
some of them are completely ridiculous.
so I get one now from a coffee company who I have a loyalty card with, right? And they'll often tell me how much coffee I've drunk that month, right? And that makes me want to go, I need to drink less coffee. You can tell the ones that want to do it, but I haven't transacted enough with them for them to give me any meaningful information. So they tell me what the rest of the world is doing. And I'm going, why are you telling me that this is where other people travel to in the world? Right? Honestly, that means nothing. That means nothing to me, right? If you're using it as a way of inspiring me, that's great. But this was a 2024 wrapped for you,
Wrapped.
right?
Yeah.
Wrapped for you, right? It's not, is it? You're just telling me what the rest of the world are doing, not the same thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that's like, if as a software company, I send our customers an update saying, look, this is how much revenue we did this year, and this is how many new customers we signed, they're going to be like, well, that's great for you, but why do I care about this?
Yeah.
My biggest fear would be getting a Wrapped from Netflix, which tells me exactly how many hours of my life I wasted vegetating on my couch. I know there's a way you can see that information in your Netflix account, but I don't want to know that. And I don't think
How
most
much time?
people do.
How much time you've wasted actually scrolling through the content that they think you should be watching, right, before you find the actual movie that you want to watch or the content you want to watch. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
There's one thing that I was thinking about when you spoke about the ESOP in-store experience, where they're talking to you for those 30 minutes, or even if you think of Avon, where you have a B2B2C setup, so you kind of have someone in between who needs to be capturing the data. Because one of the challenges I see often in retail, especially when you talk about omni-channel brands or retailers, is CRM is anchored somewhere within the digital organization, so somewhere even close to or within e-com. And these guys are thinking about the world the way an e-commerce person thinks about the world, right? Which is, I have data from the moment you land on my website through checkout. I know what you've been clicking on. I know your dwell times. I know all of these things, so I can run a great campaign. And then someone tells them, look, you got to do this also for the physical stores. It's surprising how many retailers won't send you store-specific communication when it's almost guaranteed that you'll be interacting with the exact same store every time, right? I think there's two parts to that problem, right? One is, once you have that data, using that in a smart way. But often the problem starts even earlier, which is, how do I even get that thin or thick data in a meaningful way out of my stores? And obviously loyalty programs are one way that people try to solve this, but that's getting your transactional insight. And then you've got the whole cameras and AI and beacons business, which I would argue is, from a total cost of ownership perspective, challenging to say the least, given you're not sure what you're going to get out of it. In all of your years doing this, what smart but interesting but not too complicated ways have you come across to solve the in-store data problem?
So I think it's thinking about what I call minimum viable data, right? So what is the least amount of data I need to collect from a customer to move the relationship on, right? Or to solve that customer need or want that we talked about. Because I think that ESOP is one of those brands where they show that a light touch can work, right? And we never discounted. And so when I was there and we were thinking about the data we wanted to collect to drive our CRM campaigns now, 6 months and in 18 months' time, we talked to the marketing teams and they said, so what data would you like to collect? And a few of the marketing team members from around the world had come from some big brands. And they said to me, well, in store, we want you to collect date of birth. And I said, well, what are you going to do with date of birth? And before you answer that question, just to let you know, as a brand, we would never send out a happy birthday email because it's just not part of our DNA to do that. Because we wouldn't offer a discount either associated with that. And we never sell our products based on the age of the customer. So tell me now why you want to collect birthday. And they kind of went, I know, maybe, I mean, you're right. Maybe we don't want to collect birthday. So I think that the idea of really understanding the data that you need to collect to deliver on that customer promise. I think that's a really good starting point, because again, what that helps you do as well is that, again, with the retail teams, I don't want to collect lots of data because it ruins my in-store experience, right? And that experience with AESOP might be because it's a beautiful, well manicured experience. And now you want to ask 10 different questions at the point of sale. I don't want to do that. Really, all I need, either to be collected by the consultant, a piece of paper, or a bit of technology, is their name and some way of contacting them, and permission to get that, right? So whether that's email address or mobile number, full stop, because everything else can be collected later on. It's this idea of how can I progressively get to know more about the customer, right? So there's that stuff
And
that you
earn the right to ask for more.
Yes, yeah. And again, it's about earning that trust as well, right? When you've collected that first bit of information, you made a promise to the customer that you won't spam them. You make a commitment, you maintain that commitment, so you're building trust. Because I think trust is one of those things around consistency as well, right? So I trust you as a brand because you are consistent. You've told me what you're going to do, and you are consistent with that. You then, I think, start to have more leeway in terms of, I'm going to ask you something else now. I'm going to ask you something else. And yes, it might take you a bit longer to know the customer, right? If you're doing grocery shopping, I'm already learning a lot about you as a customer, because I can see your average spend, I can see your product mix, I can see where you're buying it. Even with, I remember doing some work with a supermarket, with their online shopping, grocery delivery service. We knew at what point in the week you started to create your shopping list for the weekend. Right? So these days you just know everything about them from a transactional perspective. It's just thinking about, well, what are the supplemental pieces of information that I need to help the customer with their experience? Yeah, and often it's about explaining to the customer why you're asking that question. I did some work with a baby food organization, weaning products, and I remember the one key piece of data that we wanted was the birth date of the child, for obvious reasons, right? Because the weaning advice was based on the age of the child, and it was there as a field on the website, and it was about 25-30% completed as a data field. We then put a hover button over there, and as soon as the mother, it was normally the mother that filled out the page. When she went to that page and hovered over that, we explained that we're not going to send out birthday emails, we're not going to send out promotional messages, but our weaning advice is based on the age of your child, which is why we're asking the child's age. That field population went up from 30% to 80%, almost overnight. Right? So again, it's about, we often talk about this value exchange between customer and brand. It's like, you give me this because I'm going to give you this, and I promise that that's the only thing I'm going to do with that data that you're giving me. So there's a film that you should watch. In fact, everyone should watch. It's a film called The Conversation, and it's 1970s. Gene Hackman plays Harry Cole, who's a surveillance expert, and the film revolves around him and his team trying to capture this conversation that this couple are having in a park, and his team have got 3 different surveillance points, using different bits of equipment. And Harry Cole takes all this information, takes it to his lab at night, and tries to mix in the different signals that he's getting from these different surveillance pieces to try and understand what's happening with what they're talking about. And that's what we do as marketeers, right? We're picking up all these different signals and we're trying to make sense of it, right?
I'm trying to find the signal from the noise.
Exactly, right? It's a really good film. And it comes, there's a nice little spin at the end, just based on the interpretation of one sentence that he's picked up in the conversation. But again, you start thinking about the ethics, about why we're collecting this data, and how very quickly you can get things wrong because you put too much emphasis on a particular piece of data. I remember working with an organization who the marketing insights team kept telling me our customers are demanding a loyalty scheme. The data is telling us that our customers are demanding a loyalty scheme. Oh, okay, that's great. Okay, let me have a look at the data, and in particular, of the thousands of surveys that are going out, what percentage of customers are talking about loyalty and recognition and rewards? And it turned out that it was 5% of one segment of the database, right? And here's the marketing insights team telling me customers are demanding a loyalty program. I said, well, that doesn't seem like much of a demanding 5% to me, right? So again, it's about understanding where the data is coming from. Data is often nuanced depending on what a particular department or a customer set wants to deliver, or what the messages they want to deliver, right? So again, it's understanding where that data is coming from, what you're going to do with it, why people are presenting it in a particular way. I remember we used to do surveys with customers about, we asked them what salary range they were in, and they'd often, very, very often, bump up their salary range by at least one bracket, because they often thought, well, if I say I'm this, I'm not going to get the stuff that I want that these people are getting, right? So I'm going to tell them that I'm here. Or
It's like the average person is 5 centimeters taller on dating apps, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So again, I remember there's a famous saying from a behavioral economist called Daniel Kahneman, and I'm going to get it not quite right, but he said things like, thinking to humans is like swimming to cats. We can all do it, right? But we'd rather not.
We just don't like to. All right.
You have to make things as simple as possible for customers, but nuance that with an understanding that ultimately customers are lazy. Yeah.
Can only agree to that. It's a good segue into our closing section, which is the rapid fire round, because that will require you to think
Really?
and very quickly. So I'm gonna shoot a couple of questions your way. Share the first thing that comes to your mind. Don't think too hard about them.
No. That might be worrying in a few minutes' time. Just
Look, I've already got the movie down in my list to watch, so maybe you have some other tips that'll come out of the rapid fire round. And I'm going to start with that right away. What's your all-time favorite TV show?
Seinfeld. That was easy, right? And because it was
a show about nothing.
A show about nothing, right? Which then ultimately, which is why my book is a book about nothing, right? Because
good segue to my next question. Yeah. What's your favorite book?
Apart from the one
Don't say your own.
Okay.
Or let me, something
Listen. I often think that if you reread a book, that's usually a good sign, right?
That's a great sign. Yeah.
So from a business perspective, actually, bizarrely, I've actually got it here on my desk. I didn't know you were going to ask me this question, but so I'm rereading this book. It's called Legacy.
Okay.
And effectively, it's a management book, right? But it's about the New Zealand All Black rugby union team.
Interesting.
And I often go back to this book because it reminds me about being humble and about doing the simple things, right? Getting the basics done first, because everything else becomes a lot easier. Even things like, these guys at the end of a match will clean the dressing room before the cleaners come in, right? So, and it's just every now and again, I'll just dip into it, and I think it's just reframes everything that I want to do, and that I try to do when I'm working with a brand, which is, let's not overcomplicate things. Let's understand what we're trying to deliver. It's about teamwork. I 100% recommend it.
Sounds like a great read. So I have a movie recommendation and a book recommendation now. It's going to be a good weekend. And my last rapid fire question for you: one skill or talent you wish you had?
I wish I could play a musical instrument.
Which one would that be?
Well, my daughter plays piano and cello. My other daughter plays piano, violin, and is a good singer. My wife can play the piano. I'd probably say something that would really annoy the neighbors. So maybe a trombone. No, piano. I'd love to be able to play the piano. Yeah,
All right.
it's never going to happen.
Or a drum set if you really want to annoy the neighbors.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about drums, but no, I think piano. But that's not. If you hear my singing voice, you'd understand why I would never play the piano.
All right. On that note, Gianfranco, thank you so much for being with us today.
Time's flown, hasn't it?
Really, really, yeah, time has indeed flown. We've a lot of insights around different ways personalization can be done without complicating it, keeping it simple, staying humble, and a couple of really good content recommendations that I'm looking forward to diving into, especially the movie. That sounds like something that would be right up my alley.
Yeah. No, it's great.
So you're going to check that out. And you have a book that's out there that, I think could also be interesting for our audience. So if you want to share the name of your book and, share a line about it, super happy to have that in there and get the word out.
That's very kind of you. It's called In Pursuit of the Trivial, a book about nothing. It's 7 perspectives. Everyone's an expert. I decided not to write a book being an expert. So there are nice 7 stories in there. The chapters are bizarre. Why are basketball players tall? The day I stopped eating pizza for 6 months. Just interesting narratives and perspectives that actually then I think will help people rethink and reframe how they think about data, CRM, customer journey planning. I just wanted to write a book, and last year I did it.
Awesome. To fulfilling one's dreams. Thanks, Gianfranco.
Thank you very much
for your time today. And looking forward to hearing a lot more from you on all of these topics, hopefully in another version of our podcast.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Retail Spotlight. And that's how you found it. Whether you're in the retail industry and want us to dive deeper into certain topics or invite certain guests, or if you're a passionate shopper enjoying a behind-the-scenes look, we want to hear from you. Hit us up with your comments, likes, and feedback. And if you know someone who loved this episode, please share it with them. Lastly, if you want to stay informed when we go next live with the next episode, make sure to hit the subscribe button. See you next time.